Our objective today is one variable statistics. Some definitions. Data is a collection of information in context. Population is a set of individuals that we wish to describe and or make predictions about. So for example, if we wanted information about Durant Road Middle School, the population would be everyone at Durant Road Middle School. The individual is a member of a population. So one student at Durant Road Middle School would be an example of an individual. A sample is a part of the population. So for example, if I want data on the 8th grade at Durant Road Middle School, the 8th grade is a sample within our population. And a variable is characteristic recorded about each individual in a data set. Now there are two types of variables, categorical and quantitative. Categorical is a variable that records qualities or characteristics of an individual. So your categorical, which is also called qualitative, it is recording qualities or characteristics. So for example, gender or eye color. Quantitative variables is a variable that measures a characteristic or an individual. So if you notice, quantitative is able to measure, categorical is able to record the characteristic. So quantitative, being able to measure the characteristic, would be things like height, weight, or age. It's a number. You can measure that. So let's look at some examples. We need to decide whether it's quantitative or categorical. Well, birth month, that's January, February, March, so on and so on. Those are months. That is something that you can record. It's not something you can measure. So this one would be categorical. Number 2, number of siblings. Well, the number kind of gives it away, but since it's a number of siblings, you can measure it because it can be used in numbers. Since it is measuring, this would be quantitative. Oops, spelled that wrong. There we go. Number 3 is very similar to number 2. Number of pets. That is something that can be measured, so it would be quantitative. And number 4, predicted letter grade on your first test. Make sure that you are reading these problems carefully because this is saying predicted letter grade, not number grade. So since it's a letter grade, A, B, C, D, or F, that is something you can only record. You can't really measure it because we're not talking about the average. So since it's only the letter grade, this one would be categorical. VIC number 1. And since this is your first video for this class, VIC stands for very important concept, something that you need to remember. So VIC number 1 states there are 2 main uses of statistics. First is using statistics to describe something, which is also called data analysis. The second one is to predict information, which is called statistical inference. VIC number 2 states there are 2 ways to describe data. We can do it graphically or we can do it numerically, which is also quantitatively using numbers. So if we want to describe data graphically, we're going to focus on 3 types of graphs. Now there are lots of graphs that you can use to describe data, but we're going to focus on 3. The first one is the dot plot. It's a very standard graph. It's just a number line, and you record the frequency that each number shows up. It's a dot plot because you are using dots to represent how many times each of those numbers showed up. You can use X's or other symbols, but it's a dot plot because dots are commonly used. A histogram is the second one we're going to focus on, and a histogram is very similar to a bar graph, but there are no spaces. In a histogram, the intervals on the x-axis are even, and therefore your bars are connected because you are taking into account every single number on the number line. And a box plot is also used to display statistical data, and we use the median as our main focal point in describing this data. Now, we will get into more detail about all three of these later, but these are the three main ones that we will focus on. BIC number 3 states that when looking at data graphically, make sure that you observe the shape and distribution of the data. That will be important in our videos to come. And if you decide to describe data numerically, there's going to be two main ways. Measures of center, which is also called measures of central tendency, which in these you should be familiar with. The mean or the average, your median, and your mode. The other one is measures of spread, which is also called measures of variation, how much the data varies between each other. And those include your range, your interquartile range, and your standard deviation.